Okay, before we get into this, let's just acknowledge the whole elephant in the room. I shaved for Halloween, so yeah, if you ever want an exercise in being humbled, shave your beard. Jeez, I immediately lost 5 years. I look like I'm in my mid 20s, but at the same time, I seem to have gained like about 100 pounds just in my face. So yeah, that's a fun revelation. Enough about that. You're here to hear my thoughts about this new project from Jean-Michel Jarre. Let's dive into it. Oxymore from Jean-Michel Jarre. So, for those of you that don't know, Jean-Michel Jarre, I'm sorry, I'm looking at myself in the camera and I can't get over my face. This is just, we're going to persevere together because I've got a lot more videos to record today. And, whew. So, Oxymore, Jean-Michel Jarre. Jean-Michel Jarre is a French composer, French musician, getting his start in the mid 70s, kind of on the cusp of like a lot of the computerized electronic music. You know, he kind of broke the mold with certain albums like Oxygen and Equinox, which he subsequently followed those up with Equinox Infinity, I think it was, and Oxygen Part 2 and 3. And from there, he even did like a lot of experimentations, like more so than I feel like a lot of his contemporaries at that time did, where I feel like they were experimenting with sounds and experimenting with tones and frequencies and atmosphere. I feel as though Jean-Michel Jarre was really experimenting with like music and seeing like where that boundary, where that line in the sand for what actually music was. And you can see that on a lot of his more experimental albums like Zuluk as well as Rendezvous, and he's also really big on creating these really massive concerts and these really massive experiences. Last year he kind of continued on with this style of expression, this style of like experimenting when he put out Amazonia, which was fine for me. I loved how oddball and how experimental it was and how like almost like avant-garde it got at times, really playing with the idea of the Amazon River. And now we get Oxymore, which kind of continues that. You know, it kind of continues that whole idea. And there's actually a companion album, a sister album called the Binaural Headphones Mix that really does play with the binaural beats, you know. And I studied, you know, neuropsychology for a couple of years, you know, in the basement of the biology lab up in Laurentian University. And a big part of that was studying binaural beats and binaural sounds while entering a meditative state. And I mean, whenever a band is playing with these, or an artist is playing with these ideas, I always get very, very excited. So yeah, you got the two albums, you know, you got Oxymore and the binaural beat Oxymore. And at first, when this album first came out, I thought that this was kind of a, maybe not necessarily a continuation or a sequel to Oxygen 1, 2, and 3, but more like a sister album. And I don't think that's what we've got going on this one. This one is much more of its own thing, its own piece, and man, I've been loving the hell out of this album. It's got all the things that I really, really do love about Jean-Michel Jarre's experimental side of things. You know, like the last album that I really, really did connect with him on was the Equinox Infinity, which really saw him in a songwriter, composer like hat. You know, he was really constructing these beautiful melodies, these beautiful tones, these beautiful signatures within the soundscapes and the music. But Oxymore does the 180. It's like the pure experiment. Like there are certain moments on this album that I'm like, is this even music? Like, can I actually qualify what I'm hearing as music? And he's really playing with that line of that, like, what is music? What's not music? How do I facilitate an idea specifically through and like only through music itself? Man, this album really does like hit hard, and you have some really interesting concepts on here as well. I feel like the main concept, again, I have to do a lot of like interpretation. It's all instrumental, or I guess not even instrumental. It's all produced on the computers and whatnot. And there's like a spoken narrative in French every once in a while. And, you know, as a Canuck myself, you know, my French is limited. But yeah, I'm loving just how this album opens up with like a 3-part real big hit with Agora, Oxymore, the title track, and Neon Lips. It really does set the stage that this is an avant-garde, experimenty, like we are just going to test the boundaries on that sense. You know, it sounds very industrial in that sense. Like I'm getting flavors of like the mid-90s, like Nine Inch Nails, you know, that very grating, very electronical, very like we're in the machine. You know, it's very like Ghost in the Machine in that sense. It's almost very like soundscapey as well. Like this could have fit very easily in some of those like neo-noir movies from the mid-90s, like Dark City, like cyberpunk kind of style and soundscapes. And I'm loving how like it sounds all off kilter, but it all kind of works together in this really strange harmony as well. Like there are tones and like synth waves on here that on their own feel very off-putting. They feel very grating. But when put into this context and trying to root out the rhythm section, because the rhythm at times is more implied than in your face, it's that coming together that really knits these 3 tracks really well together. And then by the time we get to Sonic Lands, the 4th track, I feel like we're really in the meat and potatoes of this album. You know, it's a lot more of that synth wave, a lot more of this like creating of atmosphere that Jean-Michel Jarre is really, really well at constructing. And we're kind of like in the weeds there. And again, I'm getting flavors of like the Matrix and again, those kind of like cyberpunk aspects, and man, it's the 1-2 punch right after Sonic Land of Animal Genesis and Synthy Sisters that I just start to melt. And the thing that I particularly love about these tracks, specifically with Animal Genesis, is the signal to the noise, the chaos to the resolution on there. And kind of like weeding it out. You know, it's reminding me of points from like Saucer Full of Secrets from Pink Floyd or The Waiting Room from Genesis, where we're given all of this context. We're given all of this setup. So by the time at the midpoint of this track comes around, we're a lot more like things start to revolutionize. They start to come together as a whole. And it really does put the context of the things that came before in a much more enjoyable light. So by the time you listen to it on your 3rd, 4th, or 5th listen, you're much more expectant of those that are going to be coming down the line. And when we get to the Synthy Sisters, this is where, again, Jean-Michel, even at this point of his career, is still one to experiment and try new things. I'm loving what he's doing with a lot of the vocalizations and using that as the root to then play with in the synth, like, playing styles. It's reminding me of like a lot of the things that was done in the late 80s, early 90s, like the hoo ha hee hoo ha, and that would be like the main rhythm section of the tracks to really tie everything together. And we kind of lost that because I think people were like, it's overused, it's a little cheesy. But I like the fact that Jean-Michel is bringing it back into this and really tying it all together. The rest of the album, right from Sex and the Machine, Zeitgeist, Crystal Garden, Brutalism, and Epica, they have varying degrees of those that I have listed before, kind of going between the very soundscapey, very like cinematic style of music, very ethereal, very mellow and atmospheric setting, to very tangible, experimenty, very, again, I'm kind of picturing like fight sequences and a lot of those neo-noir, matrixy kind of movies, the cyberpunk era, and kind of like the blending and the crossovers between those. And it provides a really, really unique and very fun listen, especially when you transition from the album proper into the binaural beats, the binaural headphones mix. Yeah, in the end, Oxymore is an album that really did surprise me from Jean-Michel Jarre, which in and of itself is kind of surprising. I shouldn't have even doubted Jean-Michel for a moment. Yeah, this is a great, great album and one that I highly recommend. And I will say, Oxymore from Jean-Michel Jarre is one that I would absolutely pick up in physical format. Yeah, this is absolutely one that you need to have in your collection if you're a fan of more experimental side of music, if you're a fan of like electronic music as well, and if you like music that kind of pushes the boundaries. I think you're going to have a really good time with this one, as I did. So yeah, that's what I've got for you guys today on Oxymore. Thumbs up from me. I think it's a great one. Go and check it out. I think you'll have a really good time. So That's it for me. What did you guys think about this album? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Whatever you thought, please let me know by commenting down below. And yeah, as I said, that's all I got. Thank you all so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.